Welcome back to Choose Views with Richard Chu on WCPT 820 AM, where facts matter. Take it away, Richard.
Hey, guys. Welcome back to Choose Views, 773-763-9278. Great to have our guest, Dan Protest, on with us from WTTW's Firsthand and Peacekeepers. Check it out. Good segments there. Good pieces for you guys to further inform where you are. Hey, Henry, I got called out by someone that sent a text that said, "How dare you use uppity Negro?" And I have to laugh at that because in context and with the content that I was delivering, I was talking about how Republicans, GOP, and maggots were unwilling to vote for someone, and they use that as their reference point. And so this person said that, how dare I, during Black History Month, use that phrase. And I was dissing Republicans, FYI. I mean, I wasn't dissing anybody of color, anybody black, anybody of any of the groups that I listed as to why they really weren't voting for Vice President Harris. So sometimes you got to press pause and go, do I need to do I have such angst that I need to find a way to complain about something? Because I was referencing what people have said and their rationale. But, you guys keep tripping on down the road. And it's what I said. Sometimes people send stuff that, we gotta talk about. But in any event, there you go. All right. We'll keep it moving on. Welcome back to Choose Views, and appreciate you guys being with us this morning. As always, make your way over to where? HeartlandSignal.com, our digital platform. Articles and posts that you can check out. Reports on all things that the menace, the Orange Menace, is doing. And most definitely our Heartland Signal on X, audio and video clips that we have there. Very informative from everything from Trump talking about his problems with what's going on in the Middle East and how he's going to completely fumble that, to our leaders on the Democratic Party that are pushing back against the Republicans, i.e. Jasmine Crockett throwing shade at Doge, Committee Chair Marjorie Taylor Greene, which was epic once again. So lots of good stuff there, guys. Make your way over to heartlandsignal.com and check out our articles and posts that we have each and every day. So, all right. We have with us another one of those smart people that's leaning into the topics that we talk about. And who might that be? Dr. Nathan Shrader, who is the New England College and has been working and doing and keeping folks, plugged into all things civic and civic engagement. Nathan, Doc, welcome to the show. Welcome back. The last time we had you on, we had some tech issues.
That's right. And I told my father, who called me after that, to say, how'd the show go? And I said, I think Elon Musk was tampering with the with our signal. That's who I sort of pinned that on. It was just nothing we could control. It was the Doge committee.
Yeah, at work. Sitting there going, what's Richard Chu and Dr. Nathan Shrader doing? Let's mess with them this morning. So, oh man, but how are you doing? And first of all, before you answer that, welcome back to Choose Views. Glad to have you back with us, and looking forward to having you kind of on a semi-regular basis because of what you bring. Not only to your students and to the university, to the college, but also sort of the broader work that you're doing when it comes to civic engagement. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, and I will be here anytime you want me. I will be available. And I want to tell you something that I was not aware of till I taught a class last night. There's a new course I'm teaching called Controversies in American Politics. And as you can guess, we're almost out of material, and we're only a quarter of the way through the semester because there's not enough to cover. But one of my students informed me last night that this is National Hero Week. Really? And why am I bringing that up? Well, there's a specific reason I'm bringing that up. Right now, today, here where I live in New Hampshire, the Republican-controlled legislature is bringing forward a right-to-work bill. Which would essentially it doesn't do everything the traditional right to work bill does, but it would force the labor unions at their own cost to represent members who are now then allowed to be non-union members at the expense of the members in the union, which is utterly insane. And so today, even though we've got a big snowstorm forming here, there's a group mobilizing to be at the State House today, and our AFL-CIO president had a column in the paper here in town this morning. Newspapers are still a big deal here in New Hampshire politics because it's so localized. But but on National Hero Week, it made me think about those union members who are out there trying to block this sort of awful legislation that would undermine their own families and the families of workers everywhere. So I just wanted to bring that up to lead off.
Well, thank you for that, because it leads to a question that I want to ask you about what are New Hampshire voters, consumers, citizens saying? What are you hearing through your students, and then up the ladder of their parents and other folks in the community? What are they saying right now about what this new administration is doing?
Well, so I think there's a lot of consternation over this, but I also believe because Donald Trump did better in the 2024 election in this. He didn't win New Hampshire, but he did better here than he had in the previous two outings. And I've talked to some people who describe themselves kind of these moderate Republicans, because there still are some legitimate moderate Republicans left in New Hampshire. They're maybe not in every state, but there's still some left here. And I think they're having a little buyer's remorse. And the other thing is that we've got here such a unique the way people look at these elections here. It's a unique way that they look kind of bottom up, not top down. So our local elections in the last cycle, the Democrats won the federal races, both congressional seats, the presidential election, but the Republicans built up significant majorities in the state House of Representatives and maintained their majority in the state Senate. So we've got a lot of voters here who they are not immune from ticket splitting, right? Which in other parts of the country that have become extremely polarized, ticket splitting has kind of gone the way of the dodo, right? It's just there are places now where you would never. It might have been happening in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, where it's not happening now. It's still happening here. So voters around here, from what the 3 years I've lived here, I've noticed that voters are sophisticated about being able to understand, well, the federal government is responsible for this. The state government is responsible for this, and my town or city government is responsible for that. So, for example, the mayor of Manchester is sort of a moderate Republican, the largest city in the state where I live, and he did not actively campaign with Trump and has never really identified with Trump. And he's likely to coast to re-election this year as a Republican mayor in a blue city. So, but then there are, pressures, I think, being put on the Republicans in the state to Republican elected officials. Every time Trump does or says something outrageous or proposes something that is going to cost the state money or jobs, they're the ones on the hook for, like, do you still support this? How do you explain this? Is this something you actually favor? And it's really putting the state Republicans here, in my view, on the spot. Are you going to defend some of these outrageous things? And so far, it seems like the state Republican Party has, but I don't know how long they can sustain that here.
So they have been supporting it? Is that what you're saying? As
the party structure itself, but I think there are still some individual elected Republicans here who have not, or who never have been associated with him and his movement, and they're the ones who are going to they're going to reap the benefits of that in the coming the round of local and town elections we've got this year.
Got it. Okay, so here's another thing that's as it relates to voting and conversations that kind of your students brought to you, and this is something that my wife mentioned to me earlier in this week, and that's this conversation around the SAVE Act, and it's kind of flying under the radar with the distractions. Look over here, look over here. Talk to us about the SAVE Act and the impact that can have on future elections.
No, and I like the way you put that. It has flown under the radars of many of us, including myself. And I consider myself someone who's very attentive to voting rights legislation. And this thing is really not. I remember this being proposed a couple of years ago. And not getting very far in Congress, but there seems to be with the Republican majority right now, the building of reintroducing this SAVE Act, which is, of course, an outrageous name meant to imply saving the United States from election fraud and fictitious election results and people voting in elections who they don't think should be voting in elections. But long story short, this bill would supersede existing state laws on voter registration requirements, because as your listeners are politically astute and probably well aware of this, but states can impose, like the state I live in, we don't have, because many of our towns are very small towns, and if you're registering to vote for the first time, you go to your town hall and you fill out a piece of paper and hand it in. And that's not been controversial historically here. But we're a state with tiny little towns where that's not uncommon, and it's part of the tradition of the state. But what this law would do is undermine existing state laws by saying that all Americans have to provide a passport, a birth certificate, and a couple of other choices on like a menu of citizenship documents, not just when they first register to vote, but every time they register or re-register. So if I move from Manchester, where I live here, I moved down 20 miles away to Concord, I have to re-register. I would have to show up in person at my town hall with my birth certificate or my passport, and how many of us have moved at some point in our lives where we have to re-register, of course, and we're used to doing that, but not presenting all this proof of documentation. And the estimate from the Brennan Center for Justice is that as of now, there are 21 million Americans who don't have something like a birth certificate, an original birth certificate or a passport readily available. Now, I have been in the last few days now that I've been kind of studying this act, because it was like I said, off of my radar too. I've been focusing more on two bills we have here in the New Hampshire legislature that would actually remove student IDs as a valid form of voter ID for college students. And the other thing that there's a second bill that would also bar someone a student from claiming domicile here so they could vote here in the state while they're in college, unless they are a legal dependent of somebody in the state. So what I'm seeing is this 1-2 punch strategy, right? The Republicans are they've got nationally the SAVE Act married together with some of these bills like I'm seeing in our state capitol here, or state house here, that are intended to outright suppress, let's call it what it is, voter suppression, to outright suppress the vote. And one of the ironies of this is the state senator who is sponsoring the student ID bill to remove student IDs as an acceptable form of identification for college students in the state of the polls, won a very, very close election by a sliver of the vote in the last race. So there's also, to me, this strategic element of, hey, if I can drive down the voter turnout just a little in my district, I won't have a tight election the next time. That's one of the ways I'm reading this. That's not what she has said publicly, but that's sort of what I believe one of the strategic elements happens to be.
So I have this, a little bit of sarcasm and punch to this. We have a bunch of weak A people in the country that if the only way you can participate in the process is to damage the process, that's just such a weak A way of being. They want to create enough additional hurdles and roadblocks for one purpose and one purpose only, Doc. It's based on racism. It's based on sexism. It's based on nationalism. I say one thing, but that's my three-legged stool. It's based on those three things, nothing else.
I think I believe that is absolutely true. History has proven that over and over.
And a little bit of ageism in there too. Racism, sexism, nationalism, and ageism. Let's think about it. College students, certain age, they're going to be impacted by this. Somebody that's older, that's moved a couple times in their lives, and they don't have some of that documentation necessarily readily available. I mean, they're 78 years old. They've been voting longer than some of these knuckleheads who are trying to come up with this legislation have actually been alive. And yet they want to prevent those groups from having a say in how our country goes forward. It's a bunch of weak A people. I mean, really mediocre folks coming up with harmful, and you said it best, suppression. Greg Pallas is one of our contributors and guests on the show, and he talks about that. He's done 2 recent documentaries talking about that, and he's someone that you guys should be aware of.
I'm going to check him out.
Greg Pallas is really, he's the truth when it comes to this conversation around voter suppression, and not just in the ways that that are sort of the headline highlight ones, but the subversive ones, the ones that are quiet, like you just said, that are kind of under the radar. Add some flavor to this piece when it comes to the married name piece.
Right.
When it comes to the SAVE Act.
Yeah. Look, again, this is as I started reading through the various provisions of this. They have managed to work in just under the guise of protecting the integrity of elections and making sure our elections don't have non-citizens voting and all these other kind of boogeyman tactics. Voters who change their names, from the analyses I've been reading, it doesn't have a provision right now. I mean, it could be amended, of course, that would allow a married woman who changes her name, but that name no longer matches with what's on her original birth certificate. There doesn't seem to be a mechanism right now that would allow them to easily register without producing other multiple forms of in-person identification. And I think this is the part I should have mentioned earlier and I didn't. This would basically, if the SAVE Act is passed, and I have no reason to doubt that Donald Trump or his co-president Elon Musk would support this. I no doubt they would. This would basically eliminate mail-in registration. It would essentially eliminate same-day registration that states like New Hampshire has, right, where you can do this on the same day because you would have to you'd have to have all this documentation with you in advance. And if you're a married woman, your name changes, that your married name, if you adopt that name, doesn't match your original birth certificate, then that document is not valid for that purpose. You have to have other supporting documentation. And it may very well be possible for many voters to come across that or have that documentation, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for all. And the idea is, I think, in our democracy, the idea is that we have the right to vote or to choose not to vote, right? That's sometimes, as much as I would encourage people to vote, we still have a right to abstain from voting. But that doesn't mean we ought to be erecting any of these superficial roadblocks to at least letting people register and then letting them choose if they want to vote or not. But the first element of this is, of course, limit the voting pool by removing as many people from that pool who you may believe strategically to be against your party. Yeah. And there's one other piece to this. I think there's this false assumption too, because like these bills making it harder for college students to register or to vote. They're also making this assumption that every college student in America leans in one direction, and I know that is certainly not true. Yeah. So they're not just disenfranchising the college student who votes on the Democratic side; they're disenfranchising the college student who votes on the Republican side too. To me, it makes assumptions that should not be made by an intelligent person.
Well, and that's the key right there. Assumptions that should not be made by an intelligent person. I'm going to throw some major shade in a second, but I have to come back to a point you just because you know where I'm going. I got to come back to something that you mentioned in that process about the numbers of voters that are college age voters and use their college ID to vote. Listen, to your point, not everybody that's on a college campus, and you know because you're right there in the cauldron, is necessarily going to vote one way or the other. So they are cutting off the potential future of their party's voting mechanism by saying, unless you're all these things that we just lined out in this new legislation, you can't vote. It just goes to show a couple of things, Doc. One, desperation, a lot of stupidity, frankly, because and then the other part, which is the craven part, they only want, let's go back history lesson, white male property owners to vote in America, because it's also going to cut off women who were married. Because let's be honest, if we look at some maybe stereotypical means of not communication, but means of how our society goes forward, there are a lot of women on the Republican side that get married that do what? They change their name, just like women that are Democrats. They change their name. So it is conceptually crazy a way, if you believe that their goal is to purify the voting blocks. It's actually not about that. It's saying we only want, straight white men that are property owners, sound familiar, history, to be voting in America. I mean, tell me I'm crazy, Doc.
Oh no, look, I don't think you're crazy. I think we've seen this repeated so many times that it's like the Peanuts cartoon with Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football keeps getting pulled out from under. Like, we go through the same. It's the same thing over and over again, and we have to re-educate people over and over again about why this has been done before, but why, right? And people, unfortunately, many voters seem to have very short memories on the United States has really only been a functional democracy since the late 1960s, and they forget that part. And there have been continuous efforts by the kind of the reactionary side to chip away at that. And there's two political scientists that I'm reading one of their new book now, Paul Pearson and Eric Schickler. They're talking about it. They're saying how on the right side of the spectrum in the United States, they're chipping away, trying to make sure that the 1960s never happened. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a pretty effective way of putting it, right? Because so many of the rights recognized by the federal government and upheld by the courts in that time period attempted to make the United States a more call it more accurately a democracy than it had prior to that.
Yeah,
and they don't like that. They never did.
Well, this is for another conversation when we have you back in a few weeks, and that's the age group of the people that are making the most hell right now. Does fit in a certain narrative about what they saw their fathers and uncles get in terms of white privilege that they weren't afforded themselves. And that's another conversation that you and I'll have. But I want to,
definitely.
You know what I mean? So I want to come back to something that's been on my mind. And I often talk about, okay, we can be upset about these things. We know they're in front of us, but we've got to take some action. And so as much as I'm going to put out what's out there and talk about it, we have to make sure that Americans don't become desensitized to, as you've put it, the tidal wave of misinformation and distraction. What are your thoughts there?
Well, so what I have been telling people since the election in November, and everybody, of course, had this couple days or weeks right after where I think people were so fatigued by what happened, the whole process, and just needed a little time to regroup. You don't have to feel as if you are fighting the battles alone, right? And so America, going back to a previous generation, we were always kind of the country of joiners, right? We join organizations and we join groups in our community, and some of that has fallen by the wayside in previous decades. But I think this is a time where the best thing that that concern people, those who are worried about our future, who are worried about what they're seeing in our country and around the world. You don't have to take on, say, the MAGA establishment in Washington by yourself. There are millions of other people that also want to do that. But sometimes that activity, those actions start in your own neighborhood, in your precinct, in your ward, on your block, right? That the way to organize and the way to move forward doesn't have to be just marching on Washington when there's an anti-Trump protest. That's important, but that's only a piece of it. There has to be the local component, because that's where that's where the people are. That's where your neighbors are. And I would tell people, if you want to be the most effective you can be right now with what's happening around us, don't look to D.C., look down your street. What can you do in your neighborhood? Join your if you want to do this, your party's committee in your town or city, and work at the ward or precinct level. Join Americans for Democratic Action or the ACLU, or a group that has a local chapter or something that you can work with people face to face, not just on social media. That's my advice right now, and because I think when we get it back to the local organizing component, that's what the Republicans have been doing for years, and they've been good at it. And the Democrats kind of look more towards D.C. these days, and it's getting it back to the local organizing that's face to face, and that lets people realize I'm not alone out there. There are other people that think like me, and they exist outside of Facebook and Instagram.
They're right down the street. They're the people that
they're right down the street
that I don't acknowledge necessarily because I don't know. And there's a gentleman here in Chicago that has an organization that's called My Block, My City. I'm sorry, My Block, My Hood, My City. And his name is Jamal Cole, and he speaks to that in large volumes about the importance of right there when you walk out the front door, left and right, are some of the people and resources to help, in that work. And I applaud him in that space. We've had him on the show, on the guest. We're going to have him.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, he's a great dude, and the work that he's doing is right. It's right in your face, right locally, right there. So I appreciate what you said in that space, Dr. Shrader. It's great having you with us and having a clear call so that people can hear your message and hear your thought processes and the things that you're recommending in terms of being able to take action. And we're going to do this on a regular basis because what you have to say and your work is too doggone important for people not to know about and not to hear. So thank you for being with us again this morning.
Well, and I'm so glad we got to have this conversation, and I'll be back anytime.
Absolutely, guys. Associate Professor of Politics, Chair of the Department of Politics at New England College, Dr. Nathan, who I refer to affectionately as Doc Shrader. Thanks for being with us this morning.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Be well.